Hi, I am Steinar Berg and I am in Fossatún in the west of Iceland. We run a restaurant and accommodation here, and it is tied to our slogan, rock and troll. Rock is the connection that I have had almost all my life with music, or all my life with music. And the troll situation is the fact that we are located here by Troll Waterfalls, which turned me on to become a writer of troll books. And we are working with the troll theme, with the troll walk, etc. Where I am now is in the dinner room, and here we have my record collection and CD collection over there. It's about 3,000 vinyl albums and about 4,500 CDs altogether, and some DVDs also. So when our guests come here for dinner, they can pick a record and we will play, the record that they choose. And it creates a nice atmosphere, and people share their thoughts and ideas and taste for music. One of the questions I get most of all is, when did I start collecting records? And my answer is, I never really started collecting them. I was always very interested in music. First I had the tape recorder, reel to reel, and I collected songs to play, and then I managed to buy my own record player and started buying records in 1968. And the first record I bought was Fleetwood Mac's first album, and from then on I was always buying records and learning what was happening in music. And then one thing led to another. I was kind of undecided with my education and what to do in life. So I was working in a fashion shop over Christmas, in a Christmas break. And they offered me to head what was then just established a record and a hi-fi department. And the speciality of that record shop was to import records from the US. I guess the rate of the dollar was favorable at the time because the situation in Iceland was like one company basically having a kind of a monopoly of everything imported, and they were doing it more or less by sea, so it was slow coming. But we were fast, shipped them in by air, and also there was a great difference of records coming out in America and in England or Europe at the time. And it was fun, and to give an indication of this record collection, I decided to take us back in a time capsule, in a time machine, back to 1972, which is the first year I was managing this record shop, starting 19 years old in the early part of the year, becoming 20. And I checked out and have taken out the records that I bought in the year and listened to in the year of 1972. And here we go. So it is a total of 68 albums. And it is based on that we were importing from the US at the time. So it's only international albums, no Icelandic albums are included. Maybe I will do that a little bit later, but there were very rare releases of Icelandic albums in 1972. Only a handful of albums saw the day of light in the kind of rock area of music. So here we go, we start. First album is the Rolling Stones, Exile on Main Street. Rolling Stones totally at their peak and one of my favorite albums and one of the great rock classics. Second album is David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust. David Bowie stepped into the arena and everyone was looking at and listening to what he was doing. Rod Stewart's fourth album, he was starting to have a great success at this time, and this is a very good album in the run of what he was doing and leading up for him to be the superstar he later became. Here is Chicago. This is Chicago 5. It is an album that included the hit single Saturday in the Park. How did it go? Saturday in the Park, I think it was the 4th of July. People laughing, people smiling, a man selling ice cream. As we are doing this now in the Corona situation, this is a picture far removed from the world as it is today. But a great album from Chicago. And then it is Van Morrison. He also had released a couple of very strong albums and continued his run with St. Dominic's Preview. Colin Blunstone, maybe not everybody knows who this guy is, but Colin Blunstone was the singer and is, I think, still with the Zombies. Successful English band, but his solo career is often overlooked. He made some very, very good albums, and this is certainly one of the albums that I played all through my lifetime and still do. Lou Reed had also split from his band, the Velvet Underground, and started a career as a solo artist with a little help from David Bowie and Mick Ronson. And Transformer was a huge success, of course, with Take a Walk on the Wild Side and more songs, Perfect Day. Here is Bread. Bread, you know, were hugely successful at the time. They're kind of middle of the road music, but I always liked them. Well composed songs and well executed. And as you can see on this album, this is a quadra-disc, but I will not go into that. But the quadraphonic was a new sound system that was supposed to change how you listen to music, but it didn't. And here is Edgar Winter stepping out from the shadow of his brother Johnny Winter, and Frankenstein, this hit single from this album, ruling the charts. So that was the white department, so to speak, and here we go to the black department. This is Stevie Wonder. He actually released 2 albums in the year of 1972. Music of My Mind first, and then the successful and groundbreaking Talking Book. This is the album where he developed his electro-funk kind of sound and laid down the cornerstones for his success in the coming years. Great album, one of the great albums. The most probably successful black artist in 1972 was Al Green. He also put out 2 albums within the year, and they both sold platinum in America. Again, something that I have liked and lived with all my life. There's always a special atmosphere to put Al Green on the record player. War used to be Eric Burdon's War. Eric Burdon, the singer of The Animals, had his band as his backup band, but they stepped out on their own with this album a funky, soulful album that was hugely successful with songs like Cisco Kid and more. And this is Jimmy Cliff's soundtrack to the film The Harder They Come. This is 1972, introducing the reggae music from the Caribbean, from Jamaica, to the world, the American market and the world, really. And note, this is a year before Bob Marley puts his first international releases out through Ireland in the UK. That's a year later. Yeah, a lot of good albums being released in 1972. And this is the start of a kind of emerge of the singer-songwriters area, a lot of singer-songwriters coming up and making their own albums. That is, the writers making their own albums with their own songs. Leading the herd, James Taylor, with his album, not one of his best, but a pretty good album. Joni Mitchell continued her streak of good albums. She had previously released Blue, and after this it was Court and Spark. Randy Newman had started to put out solo albums a little bit earlier and still is putting out solo albums, and this contains a lot of many of my favorite songs, one of them being Political Science. It could be like a presidential tweet from last week. No one likes us, I don't know why, we may not be perfect, but heaven knows we try. All around us, even our old friends put us down. Let's drop the big one and see what happens. Nick Drake, he put out this album in 1972. He was a troubled individual, and he made some great albums, great music, but he found more fame in death than in life, nevertheless. Loudon Wainwright, the third, with his third solo album, and this was the groundbreaking album for him because he ran into a dead skunk in the middle of the road, and that changed his life. Jim Croce was starting to have a success in 1972, and again he found more fame after he died in the following year in a plane crash. But this was an indicator of what was coming, and but his greatest success was nevertheless, unfortunately, after his plane crashed. This is David Ackles. Probably not a lot of people know who this guy is, but it was produced by Bernie Taupin, Elton John's lyric writer, and when it came out it was hailed as like the Sgt. Pepper of folk music, and it is a great album, but unfortunately it went down below and under most people's radar, so not many people know, but it's worthwhile if you can check it out. Jesse Winchester, he was starting to make very good albums, and this is one of them, but he also fled to go to Vietnam and went to Canada instead, and that is where he spent the following years working and living and making some very good albums. This is John Prine's first album. No, second album. This is John Prine's second album, come out in 1972. And John Prine is probably the artist I've listened to more than anybody else throughout my lifetime. And this is his second and very good album. And when this is spoken, when I'm saying this, John Prine is fighting for his life against the corona virus in Nashville. And I don't know the outcome of that yet, but his music certainly will be with us for a long, long time. Some of the singer-songwriters formed duos with other singer-songwriters, and here is Lodgins and Messina and Shields and Crofts, both hugely successful albums at the time and very, very good albums. I've listened more to the Shields and Croft one. That is, was like glued to my record player for many, many months at the time. Yeah, so here we are, about halfway through, and you're probably wondering how anybody could have time to listen to all of this music, but believe you me, there was time. It was totally different times as far as radio and all kinds of leisure activity is concerned. So the main purpose in life was listening to good music, and I gave it all the time I had. And so it's a lot to go through. In 1972, Jackson Browne, singer-songwriter, released his debut album. He was one of the California singer-songwriters, friend of the Eagles, etc. And a very strong debut album. Strictly speaking, this came out in 1972 in late December, but I got it in 71 in December, but I got it in 72. So I include it here. It's J.J. Cale, first album. He had tried a little bit, not worked out, worked as an engineer and worked in music, but put out this album, and the rest is history. Very, very good, stylish album. Also, two bands debuted with very strong albums in 1972 that I have here. One is Steely Dan, you know, an album that includes Do It Again, Dirty Work, and Reeling in the Years. Has to be very, very good. And the Eagles, I mean, when this album came out, not a lot of people knew who the Eagles were, but here they start their kind of bridging into country and rock, and this became hugely successful with Take It Easy and the Peaceful Easy Feeling singles that came from it. Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young had been very successful in the previous years, but they had always a little bit of personal disagreements and problems. So they had all gone in their different direction. In 1972, Neil Young put out Harvest, which is his by far most successful album as far as sale is concerned, and made him a household name all over the world. Stephen Stills put out an album called Manassas and then formed a band of the same name, Manassas. It's a double album, very ambitious project and a good album, but not hugely successful. And David Crosby and Graham Nash put out their first duo album. They were very close friends, but unfortunately that friendship has not lasted. Hope they get together and become friends before that life has ended for them. But a pretty good album. And many bands were seeking their influences from what was the music that had developed in America in this, throughout the century and the century before, and all the blues and jazz and everything was like a melting pot, and then country and rock, and like I mentioned the Eagles before. Also, here's another one, New Riders of the Purple Shades. They included band members from well-known bands they had been in before and kept on going down that road. Same with Poco, they were kind of exploring that situation. Dr. John's Gumbo is Dr. John, a New Orleans musician, exploring the traditional music that had developed in New Orleans. And so it's another side of the, another color of the American music at the time. Same with Ray Cooder. He was taking old songs and working them up, modernizing them if you like, and making really strong albums. He made 2 albums in 1972, both really excellent. The biggest project in this area, however, was this one. This is Will the Circle Be Unbroken by Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. It's a triple album. And it is basically going to doing all the old songs, going to the roots of American music and updating it. And they were a modern band at the time, country rock band, kind of. But this album was done with the collaboration of many of the individuals who had been involved in developing the music in the earlier part of the century, if you like. So it's a great achievement and a milestone album, Will the Circle Be Unbroken. In the year before, a little bit before, Jimi Hendrix died, and this is a live album released in 1972. Another live album, half live album, with a member of a band dying, and this is Duane Allman, who died after they broke through with the live at Fillmore East. And so he's featured here in his last playing with the Allman Brothers Band. Half of it is live, the other is half is studio work. And this was a very successful album for the Allman Brothers, who would then continue their run of success for a number of years. Another American milestone band is The Band, of course. And this is also going back to New Orleans, working with Professor Longhair and other, adding brass to their material that they had recorded before and making a double live album out of that. Very successful and very good. The Grateful Dead, European album. They had made some lots of live albums, Grateful Dead, but this one was kind of more commercial, probably made to connect more to Europe, recorded on their European tour, and it was, and it is a strong, good album. Another band from Europe went over to America, to Canada, to Edmonton, and recorded there with the symphony orchestra. This is Procol Harum, an excellent album they recorded there with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra. So there's a lot of activity going on, back and forth, live, all sorts of music, and we will continue with a little bit more. 1972 is where prog rock progressive rock as it was called, a mixture of different music policies, if you like, mixed together, always under very capable, well-playing musicians. One of the best-known prog bands, Yes, put out one of their best albums in 1972, Close to the Edge. Another well-known, very successful prog band, even though their musical music covered more than prog rock, it got folky at times, etc. But Thick as a Brick is catching Jethro Tull at the top of their game, definitely. Genesis had kind of started out and was shaping up to be what they later became. And this album, Foxtrot, is their third album, I think, and one of the best ones as well, for me at least. Emerson, Lake and Palmer were riding high, very popular at the time, and bringing out a string of strong, solid albums, and this is definitely one of them. A lesser known band is Gentle Giant, very respected and admired of those who are involved in progressive music, and Octopus for me is their best album and an adventure to listen to, different from anything else. The Moody Blues are thought to be one of the pioneers of progressive or prog rock music. On this album, The Seventh Sojourn, they have softened out a bit and become more poppy and more accessible in many ways, having hit singles. But classy nevertheless, and a very strong album. Pink Floyd had done Metal the previous year, and the following year they did Dark Side of the Moon. So Observations was started as a soundtrack for a French movie, I think, and is a kind of an in-between Pink Floyd album, a little different, not bad, but not one of the greatest. Santana had a string of 3 very successful albums after following their performance at Woodstock. But Caravanserai is the album where they step out from the Latin rhythm into a more of a jazz fusion kind of a style. A very classy album. Family is, for me, a very underrated band. It's one of the bands that I've listened to more than most through my lifetime, and this is certainly one of their best albums, along with probably Entertainment. Includes a single Burlesque and more good songs. Same can be said with the Strawbs. You know, they kind of flew under the radar for most people, but nevertheless they had a little bit of a success and changed a little bit their musical style. But I think this album is a great album by the Strawbs, and I think all of their stuff really is very good. But this became a favorite, but not many people have heard about the Strawbs today. And hardly any people, I guess, have heard about Capility Brown, an English band. Pretty good album that totally got lost. One of the, decent albums that kind of sinks and gets lost. Same can be said about this one. Captain Beyond, a Los Angeles band, a pretty good prog psychedelic band, but very few people would know about Captain Beyond today. And last but not least, Audience. This is a favorite band of mine, and I played this record years and years and still do. And but not many people know about Audience. This album is called Lunch. It was their third one, I think, and their last one. They didn't last a long time. But it's a quirky kind of a prog pop, interesting music that I like very much. But catchy melodies nevertheless, but very well played. Audience, Lunch. Get it if you can. Yeah, as you have already seen, there's a variety of music. There's a melting pot, what is happening in the year. And here we go to what probably for most people would have been regarded as a little bit more strange. It's the mothers of invention. They were very visible and everyone knew them at the time, the mothers. And they put out 2 albums in 1972. One is a live album, and the other one is a more complex album, mainly instrumental, a jazz kind of a fusion album exploring different alleys of musical situations. Also from jazz, Miles Davis is doing that. He's kind of connecting into the funk and I don't want to say midstream, but because this is a special album, definitely. But he's starting laying down foundations for maybe what was later to come, the hip hop and the funk kind of a situation. And this is the very early days, 1972, of when the jazz fusion, jazz rock fusion was starting to happen, and bands, musicians playing this kind of music like, Miles Davis and Herbie Hancock and Tony Williams and John McLaughlin and Billy Cobham and Al Di Meola and Chick Corea. This was all starting to happen at this time and later bloomed a little bit as the 70s went along. And this album was leading in that department. Weather Report, this was their first album, put out in 1972 and led them to a string of very good albums. Of course, I think topping with Heavy Weather, Birdland and all that situation. But leaders in the field, definitely. So we end this on the rock note. Heavy rock is starting to emerge, and people may not agree who started what, but the definite leaders in the area were Deep Purple. They put out Machine Head in 1972, and for many it is their best album and one of the best heavy rock albums of all time. Another album which had a little bit more difficulty with their career, the guitar player died of overdose, Paul Kossoff. They put out some very good albums. Free at Last is a good album, not one of the best, but a solid, good album nevertheless. Wisp on Us put out Argus in 1972. It's a kind of a classic. Not everyone knows Wisp on Us, but people who are in rock area of music would know about the dual guitars and the soft, nice melodies. Argus, a classic album. Fleetwood Mac, Bare Trees. Fleetwood Mac were in a kind of a transit period, if you could say that. At this time, Peter Green had left them and they were developing into a new area with guitarist Danny Kirwan and Bob Wells and Christina Perfect also having joined the band. This album is one of my favorite Fleetwood Mac albums. I think it's a great album, and I always like them in all of their different periods. Today and back at Peter Green, as I said earlier in this, that the first album I bought was Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac. And this is also a good album, overlooked, and for all the Fleetwood Mac fans out in the world, go back and check Bare Trees. It's a great album. From Texas, a little old band was emerging, CG Top, with a second album. It's a blues rock journey, but their first albums, I think, were better than the later albums. And Uriah Heep, they put out 2 albums in 1972 and firmly established themselves as pioneers and leaders in the heavy rock department, if you like. So this completes the 68 albums I have stacked here and gone through. This is what I bought and listened to in 1972. It includes some albums that have stayed with me and I listened to a lot throughout my lifetime. Some I didn't listen as much to at later time, but all albums I valued and appreciated and gave a good listen, and still do. I still value all of these albums. What is remarkable, looking at this stack of albums, and this is only what I bought, of course many more were put out. What I think is amazing is that this is very male-dominated situation. There is only, in this album, maybe you noticed, maybe you didn't, there's only one woman, is Joni Mitchell. There were of course women doing music at the time, but they were more in the kind of a pop department rather than the rock and the singer-songwriter. Well, Joni Mitchell was singer-songwriter more in other departments than what I was going for at the time. And I think my taste and selection of music was pretty broad overall. And also, what is amazing, looking at this is music being released in 1972, and there's so many good albums. There's classic albums that have established themselves as, total classics over the decades. Some of the best work that some of the bands did, and it's a melting pot of all kinds of music, and people were really open to check out what was happening. And in Iceland, the situation was with radio, it was a state radio relying on classical music and spoken word, and people didn't really have a lot of chance to listen to music on the radio or elsewhere. So this was the golden age of the vinyl, from like mid-60s to mid-70s, if you like, or 80s, a little bit, golden age of vinyl records. And some of the gold dust is here in Fossatún, and maybe some of you who watch this will stop by and tell me what you like to hear. Thank you.